The metal serving spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering against the stainless steel counter as another tray crashed to the floor. Steam rose from scattered mashed potatoes and gravy, creating a mess that would take precious minutes to clean up, while the lunch line backed up behind her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Come on, lady. Some of us actually have training to get back to, muttered one of the recruits, checking his watch with obvious irritation. Maria Santos wiped her hands on her apron, her movements quick but somehow unsteady as she bent to gather the fallen tray. At 42, she moved with a careful deliberation that suggested someone nursing old injuries, though she tried to hide the slight limp that favored her left leg. Her graying hair was pulled back in a regulation hairnet, and her civilian food service uniform hung loose on a frame that had once been more substantial. The mess hall at Camp Pendleton buzzed with the controlled chaos of 1,200 Marines rotating through lunch service. Located just outside Oceanside, California, the base sprawled across 125,000 acres of coastal terrain where the Pacific Marine Corps had been forging warriors for over 8 decades. The dining facility served as the nutritional hub for thousands of personnel, from fresh recruits completing their initial training to seasoned staff preparing for deployment. Staff Sergeant Marcus Davidson stood near the entrance, his hawk-like eyes scanning the operation with the critical attention of someone whose job it was to find problems before they became disasters. At 35, Davidson embodied everything the Marine Corps represented: rigid posture, immaculate uniform, and an expression that suggested he had never encountered a situation he couldn't handle through sheer force of will and disciplined execution. "Santos," his voice cut across the dining hall noise like a blade through silk, "you're holding up my Marines." Maria looked up from where she was still cleaning, meeting his gaze for a split second before looking away. "Sorry, Staff Sergeant, just a moment." Davidson stepped closer to the serving line, noting how the other food service workers seemed to shrink slightly when his attention focused on their section. This was his domain, his responsibility, and every inefficiency reflected on his leadership. He'd built his reputation on running the tightest operations on base, and a clumsy civilian wasn't going to change that. "This is the third incident this week," Davidson continued, his voice carrying that particular tone drill instructors perfected, loud enough to be heard clearly, but controlled enough to maintain professional authority. "My Marines need fuel, not delays." The recruits in line shifted uncomfortably. Some watched with mild curiosity, others with the barely concealed relief of people grateful that someone else was receiving unwanted attention. They'd learned to recognize the signs of an impending correction, and none of them wanted to be caught in the crossfire. Maria straightened slowly, the serving spoon steady in her hand now as she resumed her position behind the hot food line. "Won't happen again, Staff Sergeant?" "It better not," Davidson replied, but his attention was already shifting to other aspects of the operation that required his oversight. The dining facility was a complex machine with dozens of moving parts, and each component needed to function flawlessly to serve the volume of personnel cycling through each day. Lance Corporal Jennifer Hayes, working the salad station next to Maria, had been watching the interaction with growing discomfort. At 23, Hayes had developed the kind of situational awareness that came from months of navigating military hierarchy, and something about the exchange bothered her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "You okay, Mrs. Santos?" Hayes asked quietly during a brief lull in the line. "Fine, honey, just tired." But Hayes noticed things others missed. The way Maria's hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking, how she sometimes paused mid-motion as if fighting through pain, the careful way she moved that suggested someone compensating for physical limitations. Most striking was the contrast between Maria's careful, almost deferential behavior and something in her eyes that spoke of depths no one had bothered to explore. The lunch rush continued with its usual intensity. Marines moved through the line with practiced efficiency, most barely acknowledging the civilian staff who served their meals. To them, the food service workers were part of the infrastructure, necessary but largely invisible components of the base ecosystem that kept them fed and ready for training. Davidson made his rounds with characteristic thoroughness, checking temperatures, inspecting cleanliness standards, and ensuring that every aspect of the operation met his exacting requirements. His reputation for attention to detail was legendary throughout the base, and he took pride in running a dining facility that consistently earned commendation from visiting inspectors. "Santos," he called out again as he noticed a slight delay in the serving line. Pick up the pace. These Marines have afternoon training that starts at 1,300 hours. Maria nodded without looking up, increasing her serving speed while maintaining the portion control standards required by military nutrition guidelines. She'd been working in the facility for 8 months, long enough to understand the rhythms and requirements, but still new enough that every mistake felt magnified under Davidson's watchful supervision. What Davidson didn't see was the practiced efficiency with which Maria handled the serving utensils, despite her apparent clumsiness during stressful moments. Her movements, when observed carefully, showed the kind of muscle memory that came from years of working under pressure, though the pressure she'd once worked under was of a vastly different nature than serving lunch to hungry Marines. The dining hall's industrial lighting cast harsh shadows across the serving area, highlighting the utilitarian nature of the space. Stainless steel surfaces reflected the constant activity, while the rhythmic sounds of trays, utensils, and conversation created a backdrop of controlled chaos that was both energizing and exhausting for those working within it. Private First Class Ryan Morrison, fresh from recruit training and still adjusting to the realities of base life, found himself studying Maria as she served his meal. Something about her careful movements reminded him of his grandmother, who'd worked in factory cafeterias during World War II. There was a competence beneath the surface that didn't match the nervous energy she displayed when Davidson was watching. "Thank you, ma'am," Morrison said as Maria placed a generous portion of vegetables on his tray. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Eat up." The brief exchange was typical of Maria's interactions with the younger Marines. Despite the formal military environment, she maintained a maternal warmth that many of the recruits found comforting, especially those dealing with homesickness during their first months of service. Davidson, observing from across the dining hall, made mental notes about staff performance in areas requiring improvement. His afternoon would include reviewing service times, checking inventory reports, and preparing for the evening meal service that would feed another wave of hungry personnel. The operation never stopped, and neither could his attention to detail. As the lunch rush began to wind down, Maria worked methodically to clean her station and prepare for the next service period. Her movements were economical and efficient, suggesting someone who understood the importance of maintaining equipment and keeping workspaces organized. These weren't skills typically associated with civilian food service workers, but rather the kind of discipline instilled through military training. The afternoon sun streamed through the dining hall windows, casting long shadows across the serving area where Maria continued her work, unaware that within hours, everything about her carefully maintained anonymity would change forever. The following Monday brought an unusual challenge to the Camp Pendleton dining facility. A kitchen equipment malfunction had reduced their serving capacity by 30%, forcing the staff to work twice as efficiently to maintain meal schedules for the base's population. Davidson arrived at 0500 hours to assess the situation and coordinate emergency protocols. Maria was already there, having arrived an hour early without being asked. She stood at the backup serving station, methodically arranging equipment with a precision that caught Davidson's attention. Her movements were different when she thought no one was watching, confident, systematic, almost military in their execution. "Santos," Davidson called out as he approached her station. "I didn't authorize overtime pay for early arrival. I'm not requesting overtime, Staff Sergeant. I wanted to ensure we were ready for breakfast service despite the equipment issues." The response surprised Davidson. Most civilian employees were strictly clock watchers, arriving precisely at their scheduled time and leaving the moment their shift ended. Santos had demonstrated initiative that went beyond her job description, though he wasn't about to admit that impressed him. "Good, because today's going to test everyone's limits. We've got a visiting general inspection at 1,200 hours, which means everything needs to be perfect despite operating at reduced capacity." Maria nodded, continuing her preparation work. Davidson noticed she'd already reorganized the entire serving line to maximize efficiency, creating traffic flow patterns that would reduce bottlenecks during peak hours. This wasn't amateur problem-solving. It showed tactical thinking about logistics and resource management. The breakfast service proved Maria's reorganization effective. Despite the equipment shortage, meal service ran smoother than many normal days. Davidson watched from his observation point, grudgingly acknowledging that Santos had contributed significantly to the success, though he attributed it more to luck than skill. During the mid-morning lull, Lance Corporal Hayes approached Maria at the dishwashing station where she was cleaning serving utensils with methodical thoroughness. Mrs. Santos, I've been meaning to ask, where did you work before coming here? Maria paused, her hand still in the soapy water. Various places. Food service, mostly. It's just that you seem to know things about organization and efficiency that most civilian workers don't pick up. Were you maybe in hotel management or something? Something like that, Maria replied, her tone suggesting the conversation was closed. Hayes persisted gently. My mom works in restaurant management, and she says you can always tell when someone has real leadership experience. The way you reorganized everything this morning, that wasn't just food service knowledge. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria dried her hands slowly, considering her response. Experience comes from many places, honey. Sometimes the most important lessons aren't learned in classrooms. The cryptic answer only deepened Hayes' curiosity, but she respected Maria's privacy enough not to push further. Still, she filed away the observation that Maria seemed most comfortable when discussing work in abstract terms rather than specifics about her background. Davidson's inspection of the facility revealed several areas requiring attention, but he had to admit that Santos's modifications to the serving line had prevented what could have been a disaster. Her quick thinking had saved his operation from embarrassment during a critical evaluation period. Santos, he called out as she prepared to leave for her lunch break. Your reorganization this morning was adequate. See that you maintain those standards. The closest thing to praise Davidson ever offered civilian staff, but Maria simply nodded and continued with her tasks. Her lack of visible reaction to recognition, positive or negative, struck him as unusual. Most people either beamed under praise or showed relief at avoiding criticism. Santos treated both with the same professional detachment. Tuesday brought a different challenge, when 3 Marines from Maria's serving line reported food poisoning symptoms. Davidson's immediate response was to shut down her station and launch a full investigation, following protocols that could result in serious consequences for whoever was responsible. Santos, report to my office immediately, Davidson commanded, his voice carrying across the dining hall with unmistakable authority. Maria followed him to the small administrative office adjacent to the main dining area. The space was spartanly decorated with military regulations, commendation certificates, and a single photograph of Davidson's graduating drill instructor class from Paris Island. 3 Marines are in sickbay because of food served from your station, Davidson began, his tone cold and professional. Explain how that happened. Maria stood at attention, not the casual posture of a civilian employee, but the precise military bearing of someone who'd been trained to respond to authority. Davidson noticed, but didn't comment on the inconsistency. Staff Sergeant, I followed all food safety protocols. Temperatures were maintained, serving utensils were sanitized between uses, and I used proper portion control procedures. Then how do you explain 3 Marines getting sick from food you served? I can't explain it without more information about their symptoms and timeline. Food poisoning can result from multiple sources, and correlation doesn't always indicate causation. The response was more sophisticated than Davidson expected from a cafeteria worker. Santos spoke with the kind of analytical precision he associated with officers briefing on complex situations. Her vocabulary suggested education and training beyond what her employment file indicated. Are you questioning the medical assessment that traced their illness to your station? I'm requesting additional information to better understand the situation, Staff Sergeant. If I made an error, I need to know what it was to prevent recurrence. Davidson studied her carefully. Santos wasn't defensive or apologetic, responses he expected from civilian employees under investigation. Instead, she approached the situation like someone accustomed to handling serious accusations with systematic analysis rather than emotional reactions. The investigation ultimately revealed that the affected Marines had consumed questionable food at an off-base restaurant the previous evening. Maria's station was cleared of any responsibility, but Davidson noticed she'd shown no relief when vindicated. Professional vindication seemed to be something she took for granted, rather than celebrated. Wednesday brought the monthly surprise inspection by the base commander, Colonel Rebecca Martinez. Davidson had 48 hours advance notice, which meant every aspect of the dining facility needed to exceed standards. The pressure was enormous, as these evaluations directly impacted his performance ratings and future assignment opportunities. Maria worked with increased intensity but not the frantic energy of someone panicking under pressure. Instead, she moved with the calculated efficiency of someone who'd operated under much higher stakes. When other staff members began showing signs of stress, she quietly took on additional responsibilities without being asked. "Santos," Davidson observed during the pre-inspection briefing, "you're working stations that aren't your assigned responsibility." Staff members were falling behind. "Staff Sergeant, I'm ensuring we meet inspection standards." "That's not your job. Your job is to serve food at your assigned station." Maria looked directly at him, and for a moment, Davidson saw something in her eyes that wasn't submission or fear. It was the kind of steely determination he associated with Marines, who'd faced life-and-death situations and emerged stronger. "My job is to support this facility's mission, Staff Sergeant, whatever that requires." The inspection went flawlessly. Colonel Martinez complimented Davidson on running one of the most efficient dining operations she'd observed. During her walkthrough, she paused at Maria's station, engaging in brief conversation about food preparation and service standards. "You seem very knowledgeable about nutrition and logistics," Colonel Martinez observed Maria. "Experience teaches many lessons, ma'am," Maria replied with perfect military courtesy. "Indeed it does," the colonel responded, studying Maria with the kind of attention senior officers reserved for people who interested them. After the inspection, Davidson felt he should acknowledge the staff's contribution to their success, but when he looked for Maria, she'd already left for the day. Her shift had ended precisely at 1,500 hours, and unlike other days when she might stay late to finish tasks, she'd departed exactly on schedule. Thursday morning revealed why. Maria arrived with her left arm in a sling, explaining to Hayes that she'd injured herself moving furniture at home. She worked her full shift one-handed, maintaining productivity levels that impressed even Davidson, though he refused to show it. "Santos, why didn't you call in sick?" he asked during the afternoon lull. "The injury doesn't prevent me from performing my duties, Staff Sergeant." "Working one-handed isn't performing your duties adequately." Maria demonstrated by efficiently serving a full tray using modified techniques that accommodated her limitation. Her adaptability suggested someone who'd learned to function effectively despite physical constraints, not the kind of skills developed in civilian food service. "I've worked under worse conditions," she said simply. The comment hung in the air between them, carrying implications Davidson wasn't sure how to interpret. Santos consistently demonstrated capabilities that exceeded her apparent position, but she offered no explanations for the discrepancies he observed. Friday brought the week's final test when a power outage forced the dining facility to operate on backup generators with reduced electrical capacity. Normal procedures became impossible, requiring creative solutions to maintain meal service for over 1,000 personnel. Maria took charge of the manual operations with natural authority, directing other staff members in procedures that maximized efficiency under emergency conditions. Her leadership was subtle but unmistakable, the kind of command presence that couldn't be taught, only developed through experience in high-pressure situations. Davidson watched from across the dining hall as Santos coordinated activities that should have required his direct supervision. She'd somehow transformed a potential crisis into a manageable challenge, demonstrating organizational skills that belonged in a much higher position than a food service worker. As the emergency passed and normal operations resumed, Davidson realized he'd been observing something extraordinary all week. Santos wasn't just competent. She was operating at a level that suggested extensive training and experience in leadership under pressure. The question was, what kind of experience produces those capabilities, and why was someone with those skills working in a base cafeteria? The following Monday brought an unexpected visitor to Camp Pendleton. General Patricia Hoffman, Commanding General of Marine Corps Installations West, had arrived for an unannounced inspection of base facilities. Her reputation for identifying operational inefficiencies preceded her, and every department scrambled to ensure perfection. Davidson received the notification at 0630 hours with his usual composure, but internally he felt the familiar pressure of high-stakes evaluation. The dining facility would be scrutinized more thoroughly than ever before, with potential career implications hanging in the balance. Maria arrived for her shift unaware of the impending inspection. She moved through her morning preparations with characteristic precision, organizing her station while other staff members buzzed with nervous energy about the general's visit. Her calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the anxiety permeating the facility. "Santos," Davidson called out during the pre-service briefing. General Hoffman will be evaluating our entire operation today. I need flawless performance from every station. Quote, Understood, Staff Sergeant, Maria replied, but Davidson noticed something different in her posture. Not nervousness, but a subtle shift toward even greater attention to detail, as if the mention of a general had triggered some internal protocol. The morning service proceeded normally until 1,100 hours, when General Hoffman entered the dining facility with her entourage. A woman in her mid-50s with silver hair and commanding presence, she moved through the space with the kind of observational intensity that missed nothing. She paused at each station, asking pointed questions about procedures, food safety protocols, and staff training. Her questions demonstrated deep knowledge of logistics and operations management, the kind of expertise that came from decades of military experience. When she reached Maria's station, the general stopped longer than at previous stops. She watched Maria serve 3 different Marines, noting the efficiency of movement and the respectful interaction with personnel. Staff Sergeant Davidson, General Hoffman called out, I'd like to speak with this staff member. Davidson approached quickly, uncertain why the general had singled out Santos. Yes, ma'am. This is Maria Santos, one of our civilian food service workers. General Hoffman studied Maria intently, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, or curiosity about something she couldn't quite place. Miss Santos, how long have you been working in the military food service? 8 months at this facility, ma'am, Maria responded with perfect military courtesy. And before that? Maria hesitated for the briefest moment. Various positions, ma'am. General Hoffman's eyes narrowed slightly. There was something familiar about Santos, but she couldn't immediately identify what it was. The woman's bearing, her precise responses, the unconscious military courtesy, these weren't typical characteristics of civilian employees. Staff Sergeant Davidson, I'll need to review personnel files for your civilian staff. Please have them available in your office in 30 minutes. As the general moved on to other areas, Davidson felt a knot forming in his stomach. Personnel file reviews weren't standard procedure during facility inspections, unless there was a specific concern or discrepancy that required investigation. 30 minutes later, Davidson sat across from General Hoffman in his office, Maria's employment file open between them. The document was surprisingly thin. Basic employment application, emergency contact information, and routine performance evaluations. Staff Sergeant, what do you know about Ms. Santos's background prior to her employment here? According to her file, she worked in various food service positions. References checked out, background investigation was clean. General Hoffman flipped through the pages, her expression growing more puzzled. No military service history listed? No, ma'am. She's classified as a civilian employee with no prior military experience. Interesting. General Hoffman closed the file and looked directly at Davidson. I want to speak with Mrs. Santos privately. Send her to this office immediately. Davidson felt his confusion deepening, but he followed orders without question. Within minutes, Maria stood at attention in front of the general's temporary desk, her posture absolutely perfect, despite supposedly having no military training. Miss Santos, please have a seat, General Hoffman said, studying Maria's face intently. I'm going to ask you some direct questions, and I expect honest answers. Maria sat down, maintaining eye contact with the general in a way that suggested she was comfortable with high-ranking authority figures. Have we met before? I don't believe so, ma'am. Your bearing suggests military training. Care to explain that? Maria was quiet for a long moment, and Davidson could see her weighing her response carefully. I grew up in a military family, ma'am. Some habits are learned early. General Hoffman wasn't satisfied with the answer. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a tablet, quickly accessing what appeared to be military personnel databases. Miss Santos, I'm going to need you to be completely honest with me. There's something about you that's familiar, and I have an excellent memory for faces, especially faces of people I've met in military contexts. Maria's composure remained steady, but Davidson noticed her hands had clenched slightly in her lap. General Hoffman continued typing, accessing different databases with the kind of high-level clearance that allowed her to search classified personnel records. After several minutes, she stopped and stared at the screen. Staff Sergeant Davidson, she said quietly, I need you to step outside for a moment. Davidson left reluctantly, closing the door behind him. Through the thin walls, he could hear muffled conversation but couldn't make out specific words. The discussion continued for nearly 20 minutes before the general called him back in. When Davidson re-entered the office, the atmosphere had completely changed. General Hoffman's expression showed a mixture of shock and something approaching awe. Maria sat in the same position, but her demeanor had shifted subtly. Less deferential, more like someone speaking to an equal. "Staff Sergeant Davidson," General Hoffman began, her voice carrying unusual gravity, "I need to ask you about a document. Miss Santos, would you please retrieve your personal belongings from your locker?" Maria nodded and left the office. During her absence, General Hoffman turned to Davidson with an expression he'd never seen from a general officer. "Staff Sergeant, what I'm about to show you is going to change your understanding of everything you thought you knew about your employee." Maria returned carrying a small locked box, the kind used to secure important documents. She set it on the desk and produced a key from around her neck. "Miss Santos, please show Staff Sergeant Davidson what's in that box." Maria unlocked the container and carefully removed a document in protective plastic covering. Even upside down, Davidson could see official government letterhead and formal military formatting. General Hoffman took the document and handed it to Davidson. "Staff Sergeant, please read this aloud." Davidson's hands trembled slightly as he held the paper. The letterhead read, "The White House, Washington, D.C., and below that, Presidential Unit Citation." "Medal of Honor," Davidson read, his voice barely above a whisper. "Awarded to Sergeant Maria Elena Santos, United States Marine Corps." The silence in the room was absolute. Davidson continued reading, his voice growing weaker with each word. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as a combat medical specialist with the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment in Helmand Province, Afghanistan." Davidson looked up at Maria, then at General Hoffman, then back at the document as if it might disappear. "This can't be real," he said. General Hoffman's voice was firm. "It's real, Staff Sergeant." Sergeant Santos distinguished herself during a 12-hour siege at Forward Operating Base Chapman. She single-handedly evacuated 17 wounded Marines under direct enemy fire, sustaining multiple injuries while refusing medical evacuation until all personnel were secured. Davidson continued reading with growing disbelief. Despite suffering shrapnel wounds to both legs and a concussion from mortar fire, Sergeant Santos maintained radio communication with air support while providing medical treatment to critically wounded personnel in an exposed position. Maria sat silently, watching Davidson process information that completely contradicted everything he thought he knew about her. "She carried wounded Marines across 200 meters of open ground during active combat," General Hoffman continued, 3 separate times. "The citation is signed by the President of the United States." Davidson set the document down with shaking hands. "Ma'am, I don't understand. Why is she working in our cafeteria?" General Hoffman looked at Maria, who nodded slightly. Sergeant Santos was medically retired after her injuries. She chose to work in support positions on military bases because she wanted to continue serving Marines, even if she couldn't serve in combat roles anymore. "But why didn't she tell anyone? Why let me treat her like a civilian employee who didn't understand military standards?" Maria spoke for the first time since returning to the office. "Because I wanted to be judged on my current performance, not my past actions." Davidson stared at her, remembering every interaction, every criticism, every assumption he'd made about her capabilities and character. "Sergeant Santos," General Hoffman said, "would you mind explaining to Staff Sergeant Davidson why you've been working under your maiden name?" Maria nodded. "After the medal ceremony, there was significant media attention. My family received threats from people opposed to women in combat roles. I changed my name legally to protect them and started working under different credentials to maintain privacy." The full magnitude of Davidson's misunderstanding crashed over him like a wave. He'd been treating a Medal of Honor recipient like an incompetent civilian, criticizing someone who had demonstrated more courage in one day than most people showed in a lifetime. The revelation hung in the air between them like smoke from an explosion. Davidson sat in stunned silence. the Medal of Honor citation still trembling in his hands as he processed the complete inversion of everything he thought he understood about Maria Santos. General Hoffman was the first to speak, her voice carrying the weight of command authority mixed with profound respect. Staff Sergeant Davidson, Sergeant Santos have been working in your facility for 8 months. During that time, has she ever requested special treatment, mentioned her background, or failed to perform any assigned duty? Davidson's throat felt dry as sandpaper. No, ma'am, never. Has she complained about working conditions, schedules, or management decisions? No, ma'am. Has she ever used her military experience to question your authority or suggest she deserved different treatment? Davidson looked at Maria, remembering her consistent professionalism, her quiet acceptance of criticism, her willingness to work extra hours without compensation. No, ma'am. She's been exemplary. General Hoffman nodded gravely. Sergeant Santos, would you please explain to Staff Sergeant Davidson why you made the choices you made? Maria straightened in her chair, and for the first time since Davidson had known her, she spoke with the voice of someone who had commanded respect in life-and-death situations. Staff Sergeant, I came back to work on military bases because I missed being around Marines. After my medical retirement, I tried civilian jobs, but nothing felt right. I needed to be somewhere that reminded me why I served. She paused, looking directly at Davidson with eyes that now revealed depths he'd never bothered to explore. I chose food service because I wanted to take care of Marines the way I used to take care of my wounded brothers and sisters. Different battlefield, same mission, making sure everyone gets what they need to complete their job. Davidson felt something breaking inside his chest. But why didn't you tell me? I could have. I would have. You would have treated me differently, Maria said gently, and that's exactly what I didn't want. The moment I became the Medal of Honor recipient, I would have stopped being Maria Santos, the person trying to prove she could still contribute. General Hoffman stood up, walking to the small window that overlooked the dining facility where Marines were beginning to gather for the lunch service. Staff Sergeant Davidson, what Sergeant Santos has shown you is the difference between earned respect and demanded respect. She could have used her citation to secure special treatment, officer candidate school, or any number of positions that would have been easier than working in a cafeteria. Davidson nodded miserably, understanding the lesson being taught. Instead, she chose the hardest path, earning respect through daily actions, demonstrating character through consistency, proving her worth through service rather than through past achievements. Maria stood up as well, moving to collect her citation from Davidson's trembling hands. Staff Sergeant, you've been a good supervisor, demanding but fair. You held everyone to the same standards, and that's exactly what I wanted. But I criticized you. I questioned your abilities. I treated you like you didn't belong here. You treated me like any other employee who needed to prove themselves. That's leadership, not prejudice. General Hoffman turned back to face them both. Staff Sergeant, what you've witnessed is what real heroism looks like in peacetime. It's not about recognition or special privileges. It's about continuing to serve with excellence regardless of whether anyone knows who you really are. Davidson felt the weight of a lesson he would carry for the rest of his career. Ma'am, what should I do now? You should do exactly what you've been doing, Maria answered before the general could respond. Hold everyone to high standards, including me. The only difference is, now you know that some people have already proven they can meet those standards under much more difficult circumstances. General Hoffman nodded approvingly. Sergeant Santos, the Marine Corps has a standing offer for you to return to active duty in any capacity you choose. Training, administration, logistics, any field where your experience would benefit young Marines. Maria was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. General, I appreciate that more than you know, but right now I'm exactly where I need to be. These young Marines need good food and someone who cares about their welfare. That might not seem important to some people, but it's important to me. And if you change your mind, I know where to find you, ma'am. General Hoffman gathered her materials and prepared to leave. Staff Sergeant Davidson, you have an exceptional employee. I suggest you recognize that fact appropriately. Quote, after the general left, Davidson and Maria stood alone in the office that had been transformed by revelation. The dynamic between them had shifted fundamentally, but not in the way Davidson expected. Sergeant Santos, he began. It's still Maria, Staff Sergeant, or Miss Santos if you prefer. I'm not on active duty anymore. Maria, I owe you an apology, not just for today, but for 8 months of not seeing who you really were. Maria smiled for the first time since Davidson had known her, and it transformed her entire face. Staff Sergeant, you saw exactly who I am. Someone who works hard, cares about doing a good job, and wants to serve Marines to the best of her ability. The citation doesn't change any of that. Davidson realized she was right. The medal hadn't changed Maria Santos. It had changed his understanding of what heroism looked like in everyday life. Will you stay? He asked. As long as you'll have me, and as long as you promise to keep holding me to the same standards as everyone else. That's a promise I can keep. As they walked back toward the dining facility, Davidson reflected on the hardest lesson of his military career. True strength wasn't always visible. Real heroism often went unrecognized, and the most valuable people were sometimes those who asked for nothing more than the opportunity to serve. The lunch service that day proceeded normally, with one significant difference. Davidson watched Maria work with new eyes, seeing not a civilian employee struggling to meet military standards, but a decorated veteran who had chosen the most challenging path possible, earning respect through daily excellence rather than past achievements. And in that quiet dining hall at Camp Pendleton, surrounded by young Marines who had no idea they were being served by one of their Corps' greatest heroes, Maria Santos continued doing what she had always done, taking care of her fellow Marines, one meal at a time. The real lesson wasn't about hidden medals or secret identities. It was about the courage required to start over, to prove yourself again, and to find meaning in service regardless of recognition. It was about understanding that heroism isn't just what you do in moments of crisis, it's how you choose to live every ordinary day that follows. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.